Okay, everyone, good afternoon. Welcome back again. Good to see you guys, and just getting the stream started. But we do have around 4 minutes till class gets underway. So for now, hope you guys had a great weekend and ready to come back and learn a little bit about Chapter 5. Hi, Chelsea. Hey, Sunny. How are you? Good to see you. Okay, just about 3 minutes. Hi, Nick. Hey there, Edward. Good to see everybody. Hi, Nancy. And hey, Danny. Margarito, how's it going? Hey, CC. Danny, Emily, welcome back, guys. Hello, everyone. Hi, Amanda and Alexa, Vanessa. Good to see everyone. Hope you guys dealt with the time change. Not too bad. It's always a little weird at first, huh? When you lose the hour. But as much as it sort of sucks to lose the hour on the day of, I much prefer having that additional hour of sunlight, like from like 6 to 7 p.m. Have a little more time in the evening to run around and do stuff. Hi, Avani, Nayeli, Ashley. Welcome, everyone. Dimitri, John. Hey there. And hey, Jennifer, Tahani. All right, nice to see everybody. So let's just get things going. It's pretty much 1 p.m. Welcome back, everyone. And like I was saying, I hope you had a great weekend. So last meeting, you guys took your midterm exam. So thanks for all your hard work studying, preparing for the test. I'm still working on the grading of that exam, so I'm going to try my best to finish it throughout this week. I have some other grading assignments that I'm working through, but for sure they'll all be done before the end of the weekend at the latest, and I'll be in touch with everyone when they are done, and you can inquire for your score just by sending me a message and checking in with me. Obviously, the other two things that were assigned before that, the first homework, the first quiz, those have been graded. That's all done and over with. So most of you have checked on your scores for those previous materials. If you haven't, feel free to do it anytime. But anyway, I'm working on grading your midterms. The next thing upcoming, we have a homework assignment which is due next week just before you leave for spring break. So Not to worry though, I'm not going to assign it until after we've learned a little bit of the material in chapter 5, because that second homework assignment has to do with this new material that we're going to start learning today. So looking ahead at the next couple weeks here in the syllabus and the calendar, we have 3 lectures on chapter 5. That's today, Wednesday, and next Monday. And then Wednesday before we leave, we'll just kind of review all the material in chapter 5, going over all of it kind of comprehensively. And that'll be the day where your second homework is due. So your second homework assignment will be due next Wednesday, the 24th. I'll give you the instructions both here in class, but also through Titanium later on in the week after we finished some of our lectures on this topic. And then you'll be off to spring break after the 24th, and we'll see you guys back when you return. You know, the class continues from there. So unless there's if there's ever any questions, comments, or reactions to anything that we've done or that we will do, just let me know in the chat, and I'm always happy to take those and add them to our discussion. Other than that, just remember, as usual, to leave behind some kind of comment at some point to just keep a record of your attendance active in the live chat. Okay, guys, so nice. Good to be with you all. I got my first dose of the coronavirus vaccine on Saturday, so I'm glad to have part 1 of that whole thing over with. And second dose coming on April the 3rd, so at least I've been able to secure the vaccine, and we're looking forward probably to some more like in-person meetings and things in the fall, and not just in school, but I think more widely in society as the vaccine keeps getting distributed. But anyway, that's part of my weekend. There were no side effects at all, at least in my case, that I could report, aside from like a little bit of soreness in the arm where the injection goes. But yeah, very, very chill, no issues at all. So everyone go out and get that vaccine. When you're eligible, of course, that's a question. But I heard that before the end of May, eligibility could be wide open to most people. All right, guys, so cool. So let's just go ahead and continue through this course. We've covered a few chapters in the book so far to this point. We started with information in chapter 8 and just a little bit in chapter 7. That was all about argument, deduction, induction. What's a valid argument? What's a sound argument? What's an inductively strong argument? What are the different forms of deductively valid syllogism, like modus ponens, modus tollens? Then we switched over to chapter 1, which is all about basic qualities that good critical thinkers have. What are some of the benefits of being a good critical thinker? What are some of the obstacles or barriers to it? And we also talked about some famous social psychology experiments from the past in that chapter. Then it was chapter 3, which is all about language and communication, what language even is, what are different functions that it has, what are different types of definition and meaning, qualities of good definitions, communication styles, and rhetoric. And then last, before the midterm, was chapter 4, and chapter 4 was all about knowledge, human knowledge, and the limits that it has. So the definition of knowledge, different schools of thought about where most of it comes from, what are different sources of evidence, what evidence is, what are some unreliable sources of evidence, and then we talked about research resources, factors to consider when you're dealing with experts, and some cognitive and perceptual errors at the end. Okay, so that's just kind of a very, very rough summary of the previous material so far. And now we're going to continue on to a new chapter, chapter 5. So chapter 5 is all about an important topic in logic and critical thinking. It's all about fallacies. Okay, so here's the word of the day, and really for the next few meetings, fallacies. We want to know what fallacies are and what are some different examples of categories of fallacies. So fallacy, what is a fallacy? A fallacy is when an argument has a logical flaw or an error. Okay, so let me just kind of give the definition of the word in the singular. What is a fallacy? It is when an argument has a logical flaw or error. Okay, so sometimes arguments are bad, like they're not logically correct, or they involve unsupported assumptions, or the evidence that is provided in the premises don't support the conclusion in a proper way. So when an argument has some kind of logical flaw or error like that, the label for it is it's fallacious. So a fallacy is a bad thing about an argument. It means the argument doesn't work, that it doesn't have the ability to make the case that it's trying to make. So fallacious reasoning is reasoning by making fallacious arguments, and a fallacy is a type of logical flaw or error that occurs within an argument. So you need to know what fallacies are. In fact, this is an ancient concept that's been with us for thousands of years, and over that whole long period of historical time, different fallacies have been identified, named, and labeled as such. So what I'm going to do is take you guys on a little tour through different kinds of fallacies. We're going to learn what they are. We're going to learn the names of them. We're going to be able to recognize when these fallacies are being committed by people when they make arguments. And then we'll also be able to check ourselves so that we don't commit fallacies when we engage in reasoning, debate, and argumentation. So fallacy, it's like an argument that has a flaw or an error. If a person has like an illness, you might say that they're not in the most healthy condition. When an argument has a fallacy, it's not a good, solid, healthy argument. There's a problem with it, it's problematic, and it's not a good argument. So we want to know what they are. Only by knowing can we ward off our own tendency to sometimes engage in fallacious reasoning, and only by knowing what fallacies are can we call people out when they commit them and say, I'm sorry, but that is a fallacy of blah, blah, blah. We call it out, we mention it to the person. So we let them know that their argument is not good and it's got this kind of logical flaw. All right, so just setting the stage for what Chapter 5 is all about. It's all about what are called fallacies. Fallacies are logical flaws or errors within arguments. We want to be able to recognize them, identify them, name them. So you want to be able to give examples of these fallacies and be able to recognize examples of them by the name appropriate to that fallacy type. In the beginning of each chapter of the book, I've noticed that they oftentimes will bring the reader in and kind of try to stimulate your interest a little bit by mentioning some kind of real-world examples where topics in the chapter are kind of relevant. So in Chapter 5, they start off with an example from real life of a woman named, let me get her name correct here, Shannon Townsend. Okay, so Shannon Townsend, the situation is this. She was a star high school student academically. She was, on the honor roll. And so because of her good academic record, she got into college at University of Colorado. And in her first semester, she was doing very well, getting almost all A's. She had a 3.9 GPA in that first semester. So she kind of carried over her academic success from high school to college at the beginning. But then something happened. At the end of freshman year, Ms. Townsend joined into a cult movement called the Brethren, which was led by this charismatic cult figure named Jim Roberts. And ever since she joined with the Brethren, she's never been seen or heard from again, because part of what they want you to do is to cut off all ties from your existing social network of friends and family. So you might think, wow, that's terrible that this happened to this one person, Shannon Townsend. But it's not just this one person. Hundreds of college students and more broadly citizens do similar things each year, being recruited into dangerous cult-type movements that are organized around the idea of excessive or even obsessive devotion to a single person or set of ideas. Now, how is it that cults are able to win recruits to their movement? Well, a lot of times they'll use deceptive techniques, including the deployment of fallacious argument and rhetoric, to try and make their ideas sound more rational than they actually are. The presentation of an argument makes it appear as though this is some type of sophisticated set of ideas. Also, they try to isolate you from your existing social support system so that all you have now is the cult and it kind of replaces your previous bonds and relationships. And a lot of times these cults will prey on young people, young adults, because at the age of young adulthood, many people are still struggling to assert their newfound independence from childhood. So as a child, you live in a household where pretty much the rules are set by your parents and your guardians, or whoever those people are, and you don't have the same kind of liberty, freedom to choose your own path, to be whoever you want to be, to think or do whatever you want. Then you find yourself all of a sudden an adult, and all of these new assumptions about adulthood and maturity are kind of thrown upon you. And some people struggle with their newfound independence and are just kind of looking for something to bond with, some kind of larger group that they can form an identity with. So the lack of assertiveness, the dependence on others, the desire to fit into some kind of group, intolerance for ambiguity, all these things set the conditions for some young people anyway to be ripe targets of opportunity for these cult recruiters. So what do you think it is that makes it very hard for someone to be a successfully indoctrinated into a cult? Well, the most difficult type of person to recruit would be a good critical thinker. Cults don't want people to ask tough questions like, well, how do you know that? Or why? Or what is the evidence? Can you show me proof? They want people to just kind of smile, nod, and be like, wow, I never heard that before. That is crazy. That is so interesting. I believe it. So you have to be a critical thinker. Otherwise, you're the easy prey and easily susceptible to manipulation, exploitation, etc. by cults. Here's what it says in the book about that, just to back it up a little bit. So just a review of this part. Shannon Townsend was excited about college, honor high school student, planned to become a physician. Finished first semester at University of Colorado with 3.9 grade point average and an active social life. Then something happened which changed the direction of her life. A few weeks before the end of freshman year, she announced to her parents that she was dropping out of college. She had joined a nomadic cult known as the Jim Roberts Group, or simply the Brethren. The cult believes in disowning family and possessions, isolating from society, and roaming the land, as they argue Jesus did, proselytizing, foraging for food. Over 10 years have passed, and her family has not seen or heard from her since she quit college to join the Brethren. And Shannon's story is not uncommon. Each year, hundreds of college students are recruited into destructive cults, a particular subclass of cults, groups organized around a set of beliefs and rituals that display excessive devotion to a person or ideology, that use manipulative and deceptive recruiting techniques, and employ fallacious reasoning. The college students, especially freshmen who are having difficulty adjusting to the college environment and are experiencing separation from their families. I mean, in times past, you'd more often have that as a hallmark of first year in college. Obviously now many of you guys are still at home because of the pandemic, but you can imagine the case. Or who are having academic or social problems are especially vulnerable to cults. Lack of assertiveness, dependence on others, low tolerance for ambiguity, poor critical thinking skills all make students more likely to succumb to pressure from recruiters for cults. And so what's the best way to avoid being targeted? Clinical counselor and expert on cults Ron Burks gives us this quote: "The key is to be well-informed, unafraid to ask questions. The antidote is critical thinking. Cults don't like people that are constantly thinking and asking questions." So to help assist us in being better, more skilled reasoners and less likely to be won over or manipulated by bad and fallacious arguments, we're going to try and learn about what these different kinds of fallacies are, and that'll equip us better to counteract any such attempts at mind control or indoctrination. So there are three different categories of fallacies that we're going to learn in this class, starting today with the first category, which we call category of fallacies of relevance. No, I'm sorry, I meant to say fallacies of ambiguity. Ambiguity fallacies are today, relevance fallacies are Wednesday, and then fallacies of unwarranted assumption, that's next Monday. So we have these three categories. Let me clear the board and write some notes about that. So the goal today is to learn about this category of fallacies called fallacies of ambiguity. Okay, so fallacies of ambiguity. This is a category of fallacies, and within this category, there are 5 different members. Okay, so like, you could say the mammal is a category, and underneath that classification, there's so many different mammal species, like lions, tigers, dogs, cats, bears, humans. Fallacy of ambiguity is a category name, and under its scope, there are 5 members that we will learn. But first, let's learn the definition of the category itself. So what is a so-called fallacy of ambiguity? So what these are fallacies which involve sloppy grammar, ambiguous words, or a confusion between 2 closely related concepts. So arguments that contain ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or a confusion between two similar concepts. So these are what fallacies of ambiguity have in common. In every case, they are arguments which have ambiguous words or sloppy grammar or just a confusion between two similar concepts. That's why they're called fallacies of ambiguity, because of the ambiguity of the words involved, or the lack of precision about the use of grammar, or the sliding in between two different and confused concepts that are somewhat related. So there are 5 members of the fallacies of ambiguity clan, as it were, and now we're going to learn about each one of those 5. So you see here the definition of the concept of fallacies of ambiguity written on the board. I'm going to erase that to create space for the 5 members of this category. Okay? So as you guys know by now, right, an argument in general is when you're trying to support a conclusion by giving reasons or premises in favor of the conclusion that support the claim. But an argument can be weak or invalid in many different ways. Sometimes the argument is bad or weak because the premises don't provide the right kind of support for the conclusion. And a fallacy is what you see when a close inspection of an argument shows that it has such a flaw. Sometimes a fallacy within an argument is not immediately obvious, and it takes a little bit of scrutiny for you to be able to detect which fallacy it has or if it has one. So let's continue. What are 5 different fallacies of ambiguity? Here are the 5. So I'll create the header just so you know these are all in that category. And we have 5. Okay, so first there is equivocation. Okay, equivocation, that's one of the 5. Then there is amphibole. And then there is the fallacy of accent. And then 2 more, which are kind of like siblings because they're very similar, that there's a slight difference in the wording. You have fallacy of division and fallacy of composition. So those are the last 2. And then the 5th one I say is fallacy of composition. So I just wanted to put these on the board first so you see the name of each of the 5, but I'll go through them one by one now so that we'll have discussion and examples of each of the different fallacies of ambiguity here. Okay, so starting off with equivocation at the top. So equivocation is our first fallacy of ambiguity to learn. What is it? Well, equivocation is a fallacy that happens when you have a key term within the argument, but the problem is that it's used more than once, and the meaning of the key term changes throughout the course of the argument. So here I'll put the definition, and then we will talk about some examples of it. Okay, so equivocation. When a key term in an argument appears more than once, so multiple times, and with different meanings. So it's when a key term in an argument appears more than once, but the meaning of the key term changes, so it has different meanings in these different places where the key term occurs. That's a problem, because when you have a good argument, the meaning of the key terms within it cannot change or shift during the course of the argument. If so, that fallacy of equivocation has been committed. In that case, as we say, using it as a verb, we have equivocated on the meaning of the key term. So hopefully we'll be able to, we'll talk about each of these in a moment, but I want to create more room just to talk about equivocation for a second. Okay, so when a key term in an argument appears more than once, but the meaning changes. As they say in the book, a key term in an argument changes meaning during the course of the argument. Okay, so a couple of ways, equivalent ways to say this. Let me give you an example though, and then you can sort of see how this fallacy is committed. Okay, so here's just a sample argument. Two premises, conclusion below. So let's say the first premise says this. Jack is at the bank. Okay, now suppose the second premise continues from there to say that a bank is a financial institution, like an institution for lending, borrowing, and holding deposited money. So a bank is a financial institution. Okay, so from here, this is, I hope, not too tough. I'm just asking you to deduce what do you think would be a conclusion that a person could draw from those two available premises. So if Jack is at the bank, and second, a bank is a financial institution, therefore, what is a valid conclusion, at least appears to be so, of this argument? He's at a bank, bank's a financial institution, so therefore, hence, thus, what's the conclusion? So Jack is at a financial institution. Thanks, Micah, yes. So is this a good argument? I mean, is it at least formally valid? It would look like it, yes. But actually, if we interrogate it a little further and just mention a few assumptions about the material in the premises, we can see that this could possibly be an equivocation fallacy. Okay, so as we talked about in the last chapter, well, a couple chapters back on language, we mentioned that a single word, if you look it up in the dictionary, typically will have a multitude of possible meanings, the primary meaning, secondary meaning, and so on and so on. So even with like a single word, sometimes you'll see that it has multiple non-identical meanings. So what is a key term in this argument that you think could be interpreted in different ways in the various places where it appears? Let me ask you that and just see if you can maybe reason your way through my question. Is there a word or term in this argument which could be seen as having multiple different meanings? And maybe which word do you think I'm hinting at? That's my question. What word in the argument, perhaps, could have multiple meanings and have different meanings even in this one argument? What do you think? Just help me take that next step. Asking you this one basic question. Looking at the argument here on this board. Okay, yeah, bank, that's where I was going. I see, Haley, you're thinking institution, but the word institution, it's perhaps a little bit less equivocal in the way it's used here. Let's go with bank, although that's not impossible to have the other idea, but I was thinking bank. Okay, so bank. Now, say we are looking at the one word bank. What are two possible different meanings that bank could have? So, on the one hand, a bank could be a financial institution, but it could also refer to something that has nothing to do with money or finance. So what's the different meaning of bank, perhaps? Anyone? Food bank, that's one option for sure, Danny. Yes, so there's the food bank, there's the blood bank, there's the sperm bank, right? You've also got, anyone else? That's a good start, and that's totally good. I was thinking there's another one where a person could be that doesn't have to do with money. There's like the bank of the river. You ever heard of that? Like the land around the river. Good, Ray. Like Mississippi River banks. So like the edge of the rivers. That's another meaning of bank. There's also the bank shot in basketball. So anyway, there's many different meanings. But let's just suppose that when we say Jack is at the bank here, we mean that in this sense. So sense number one, river bank, like river edge. Okay. Now, suppose that in the second premise, where it says a bank is a financial institution, clearly that is implying the other meaning of bank, which is bank two, financial bank. So financial, money bank, like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase Bank, whatever. So If we say in the first premise that Jack is at the bank, but we mean it in the sense of the edge of the river, so I'm putting the little number 1 here. But in the second premise, we say a bank is a financial institution, and we're not talking about the edge of the river being a financial institution. We obviously mean there that, a financial bank is a financial institution. If we've switched up the meaning of bank from the first to the second premise, does this conclusion follow any longer? So suppose he's at the Mississippi River Bank fishing or whatever, or at the food bank donating food for the homeless. And then we follow that by saying a bank, in this other sense of the word, is where people have money deposited. Does it follow that he's at a financial institution? No, because we've equivocated on the key term of bank in the earlier stages of the argument. So the conclusion does not follow anymore. Therefore, when you make an argument, you always have to make sure that any important terms or words within it don't change meaning during the course of presenting the argument. If so, the argument has the fallacy of equivocation, and therefore it's an invalid argument. So that's just one example. This is kind of a silly example in a way, because it's about, is he at the bank where there's fishing going on at the side of the river, or is he, lending money? But sometimes there are more important circumstances where such arguments of this kind and this fallacy are committed. Sometimes here at Fullerton, actually, I have taught Philosophy 325, which is an upper division philosophy class on the philosophy of sex and love. So we read all this kind of classical literature on the concept of love, romance, relationships, and we talked about consent at one point, which is obviously a hot topic in the last generation, or a couple of years anyway. There's been a lot of talk about Me Too, believing women. And so anyway, about consent, an argument that is sometimes discussed, which has this kind of fallacy in it, is used and utilized in that class at one stage. So here, look at this. So if a person consents to it, then it is permissible to proceed with sex with the person, right? So like, so premise 1, if an adult gives consent, then it's permissible to have sex with them. Second premise, by not fighting me, by not injuring or fighting, the person gave consent. Let's suppose someone argues that. By not physically resisting or fighting, she gave consent. And so therefore, the apparent conclusion would be that it was permissible to have sex. Therefore, it was permissible to have sex with her. But what key term in this argument do you think could be having its meaning changed so that the conclusion doesn't really follow? Question then. Looking at the new example, it's a little bit more of a relatable and realistic kind of heady topic, something that's actually important, instead of this whole riverbank bank thing, which is just to get you to understand it. But in this new example, what do you think would be the so-called term that we're equivocating on, perhaps, which makes the conclusion illegitimate? So just take a second and collect your thoughts, but do let me know which of the words here. The word consent, right. So let's think about the meaning of the word consent as it's been used in the different premises. In the first premise, it says if an adult gives consent, then it's permissible to have sex, which is true, but only on a certain definition of consent. So what kind of actual consent authorizes sexual intercourse afterwards? What kind of consent do you think is the kind that does figure into premise 1? So what type of act or notion of consent do you believe authorizes and makes permissible a sexual act with somebody? We should know this and be clear enough. Verbal, yeah, so something affirmative, not implied, not like I thought that they consented, but rather that the person avows through some explicit token of consent that they want to have that act go forward. So they're supposed to say yes, they're supposed to say they want to do it or initiate it themselves, etc. So this has to be explicit consent, where it's affirmed by the person and communicated somehow. But in premise 2, when it says, by not physically resisting or fighting back, she gave consent, this changes consent from being something explicit and affirmative to being something tacit and implied. In this case, it's like consent just means, well, she didn't cause any bruises, marks, or injuries to me, so she just basically didn't resist physically, therefore I took it to be consent. This is affirmative consent, and this is somehow switching the meaning to something much, much weaker. Instead of having to say it's okay, now the person claims that consent just means failure to cause injury. And obviously you guys know that a person can not elect to use force to resist somebody, but still didn't say yes, right? There's many reasons for that. Maybe the person is afraid for their life, or they're afraid that if they show too much resistance that they're going to be killed or assaulted further, right? So we don't have the same meaning of consent in premise 1 or 2, and that's why the conclusion just doesn't follow. This is equivocation on the word consent, starting with a very explicit notion and then moving to an implied notion of consent. But that's not the same notion, and therefore the conclusion doesn't follow. So you have to use the concept in one standard, uniform way throughout the course of an argument. I've also heard people say this, that if you stay in a country past adult age, then you basically agree to be subject to its laws. And you have stayed in the country past, so it's actually this argument. If you consent to be governed by the laws, then the laws apply to you and it's fair. And if you don't emigrate away from a country after 18, then that means you've consented to agree to the laws. Therefore, if you're held accountable in the law for breaking the law, it's fair. But some people say that merely remaining in the territorial jurisdiction of a country where you're born is not the same thing as offering affirmative consent to be governed by its laws. So just another consent-based equivocation argument. Let me see if there's some more stuff here in the book. There actually are a few examples in the book that are also helpful to the same point. So they have this. So Carl and Juan, suppose it seems like these guys are having a debate about the policy of assisted suicide, whether it should be or is allowed in the US law. So that's basically, suppose that someone's terminally ill, they've got like a fatal illness that they cannot recover from, and their only prospects going forward are just total pain and misery. Some people in that situation want to decide to have an assisted suicide administered by a physician, right? So in some states actually, and I believe California now, this is a new law since maybe 2016, if you found yourself into a terminally ill condition, there are procedures in place where you can legally request assisted suicide, physician-assisted suicide. But suppose Carl and Juan don't agree on this policy. So Carl says this: terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die. They have a right to decide how and when they want to die. Juan comes back and says, no, Carl, that's not true. There is no right to euthanasia in US law. Okay, now it looks like these two guys are having a real disagreement as to whether there's any such right to decide how and when you want to die. Carl says terminally ill patients have that right. Juan says, no, they don't. There's no right to that in the law. So which word that these two people are using in their discussion are they having different understandings of? Like they don't define this word in the same way. And that's what's actually producing the apparent disagreement. What do you think is the word, perhaps, mentioned in this exchange that is causing our two subjects, Carl and Juan, to appear to disagree? Carl says, terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die. Juan says, no, they don't, because there's no right to that in the law. So if you had to guess, what do you think could be the word which is being used with different understandings, different definitions by the two people here? Let's see what you could tell me. Not euthanasia, Dimitri, although I know I could understand why you might have thought that, but the word euthanasia is only mentioned by Juan, actually. So it's actually rather the word right. Okay, good, Ray, good, Brenda. It's the word right. So let me ask you this about the word right. What's one meaning of the word right that's different from another meaning of the word right? When Carl says terminally ill patients have a right to decide, what do you think is his understanding of the word right, and how is it different from Juan, who says, no, there's no right to that in the US law? They're not using the word in the same way. So what is the understanding that Carl has when he comes to the table with the statement that terminally ill patients have a right to decide? What do you think that his usage of the word right means? In saying that people have this right, what is he claiming? Just think about it, but don't think forever. Let me know. What do you think is his the underlying definition he has in mind when he says these patients have the right to decide, followed by Juan saying, no, there's no right to that in the law. So what is the different understanding of right? Juan's understanding versus Carl's. So the first person, Carl, who claims this right exists. You say they have power. Okay, that's one way to put it. Good, Brenda. Phoenix, isn't that Diane, right? You say they have the choice or freedom. Yeah, so sort of, yes. The way I would put it is this. When Carl says they have the right, he is asserting that they ought to be allowed to. So like normative, not descriptive. He's saying there should be this choice because it's a moral right. Okay, so like when Carl says they have the right, he's talking about morally speaking. Like this should be allowed. You know, like in a time when people were enslaved, someone might have said, human beings have a right to not be enslaved. And some slaveholder could have said, no, I mean, that's not the law. There's no in the U.S. Constitution, it does not say people have a right to not be slaves. That's before the 14th Amendment, obviously. But you understand, the person who says they have the right isn't talking about current law. They're talking about, like, morality. They're saying it's just wrong in and of itself, like, handed down by God or nature. It's just, that's wrong. We have a right not to be enslaved. The other person is speaking about a right, but they're not talking about the moral question. They're talking about just legally. So, legally. I don't know, some of you guys probably smoke marijuana or whatever, you know people that do, and you've heard people say the same thing, right? Like, human beings, adults, don't they have a right to just decide if they want to smoke weed or not? I mean, it's their life, it's their health, let them decide, they have a right. And then someone else could say, no, there's no right to that. If you look at the federal law, it's classified as a Schedule I controlled substance, so we don't have the legal right to that. Are these two people really disagreeing? Not exactly, because they're making different points with the same word. When one person says we have the right, they mean that it should be allowed morally. When the other person says, no, there's no such right today, they're just talking about the current status of our law, okay? So the word right has been equivocated on in that example. Here's another one from the book to just kind of fill out this discussion, make sure it's clear. This is a quote from some media reporting in the year 2010, 10 years ago, 11 years ago. So here from the book on page 1, well, actually, different edition, I won't name the page, but in chapter 5, it says this. On February 23rd, 2010, Fox News reported that Democratic Senator Harry Reid had said that, quote, if you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife. From this, the Fox reporters drew the conclusion that Harry Reid thinks it is okay for men that are out of work to beat up their wives. In doing so, they committed the fallacy of equivocation. So I'm going to erase a little bit here to create some more room for me to create notes. But if you heard what I just read off, suppose that you listen to that, okay? So Harry Reid, here's his quote. He's the former majority leader of the U.S. Senate. And he said, if you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife. So over at Fox, they picked up the quote and they said, how could Harry Reid say that? That is a disgusting thing. He's saying that if you're poor and you're out of work, then it's okay for you to beat up your wife. Now, what a terrible thing to say. Which word do you think is being used differently between the original quote from Reid and then the criticism in the media that followed his quote? Which word are they using with different understandings based on this quote? If you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife. Fox says, insanity. How would anyone ever say that it's okay to beat up your wife just because you're poor? Which word are they using with different understandings, different meanings in that little quote? Let me ask you for that. No, it's not beat up, Danny. No, that's correct, Harry. It's the word may. All right, so how about the word may? Let's go into that for a brief moment. What's one possible meaning of the word may that would lead someone perhaps to say that he's saying that it's okay? One meaning of may is what? So we're now just trying to pursue these different definitions of the one word may that leads to the misunderstanding or miscommunication here. So he says, if you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife. Fox is like, so what? If you're poor, it's okay to beat up your wife? Terrible. Since you know that the word may is the one I'm mentioning here, what are the different mental understandings of it that are implicated by this current example? So let me know, yeah, the definition of the word may. Might, okay, that's one. So that's good, Alexa. One meaning of the word may is in terms of possibility. Possible. But a different, non-identical meaning of the word may is not about what's possible or what might happen, but rather, what's a different meaning of it? May I ask? So we got one of those too. But equivocation, there's two meanings. Same word, different meanings. Well, Mike, I was not thinking about the month of May. That's kind of funny though, but it's irrelevant to the current example. No, not the month. You guys are all really with the same thing. Come on. No, not the month, but the other meaning of it, allowed to. That's right, Harry. Permission. Okay, it wouldn't make sense the month of May, guys, because that wouldn't explain the weird response given by Fox. Like he says, oh, so the month of May means that it's okay to beat your wife? That doesn't make sense. So he's interpreting it, the commentator, as though he was saying it's okay, like you may do so, like go right ahead, you may. That's different from saying whether something's possible. So like here, let me give you an example. When you look at the weather forecast, like for tomorrow, what if it says it may rain tomorrow? What is that sense of the word may? Possibility or permission? If I say the words or the statement that tomorrow there's a decent chance, so it may rain, is that the sense of possibility or permission? It's possibility, yeah, because I have no power to grant permission to the weather to have rain or not. So the weatherman saying it may rain tomorrow isn't saying I'm giving the green light for rain to happen tomorrow and it's going to happen with my permission. No, it just means that given all the factors that we're aware of, it's a quite possible thing. So anyway, when Harry Reid said that if you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife, the charitable interpretation of that is that he was referring to may in which sense? Possibility or permission? The quote from Harry Reid, if you need me to repeat one more time. If you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife. This was originally said by Mr. Harry Reid in the sense of possibility. You understand? Wait, Kenya, did you? Yes, okay, well, that's from a previous question. Yeah, so the statement from Reid just says, like, it's statistically more probable. So if you just look at the rate of this kind of crime in different socioeconomic categories, there's like a correlation that the lower down the socioeconomic scale you go, the more likely it is for there to be incidents of domestic violence. So it's just saying that as poverty goes, there's a greater degree of domestic violence. It's not saying, in my mind, when you're poor, it's okay to beat up your wife. So here's the conclusion of that from the book. In doing so, the Fox News crew committed the fallacy of equivocation, since the term may has more than one meaning. It can be used to express permission to, or it can be used to express possibility. In fact, Senator Harry Reid had actually said, men who are out of work tend to be abusive. He was not giving unemployed men permission to beat their wives, nor was he condoning that abuse. So just another case where equivocation on the word produced a misunderstanding of a person's intended statement. Sometimes the same kind of ambiguity exists with the word can. You know, you've used the word can before, like, can I use the restroom? And then some wise guy that wants to make fun of you a little bit for not being more precise in your words, I guess, could say, I don't know, can you? Like, are you able to go to the bathroom? Obviously, when the question is being asked, may I go or can I go, it's asking for permission, not whether it's physically possible. So anyway, some examples of equivocation. To just totally cap that off, sometimes we equivocate because we use a single word in different senses when we use relative terms. Like, say, for example, the word tall. The book gives us this example to consider, okay? 2-year-old Katie is very tall. Her father, on the other hand, is not tall, but is just about average in height. Therefore, Katie is taller than her father. Now, does that conclusion follow from the two premises? Katie is tall, she's 2-year-old, and she's a tall 2-year-old, but her dad is not tall, he's just an average height dad. So we say he's not tall and she is. Does that mean that she's taller than him? No, because the one word tall can be used in different senses. If you're referring to a tall 2-year-old, you mean tall for a 2-year-old, right? That doesn't mean tall in general for like an adult male. So when you say she's tall for her age, that's consistent with saying her dad is not tall, because the definition of tall when applied to adult subjects is with respect to average adult height. And the word tall as applied to children's subjects applies to the normal child height of a person of that age. So it doesn't follow from the two premises. The daughter is tall, the dad isn't, so she's taller than him. Because again, the word tall has different senses that are implicated depending on which subject that it's mentioned in reference to. Okay. So anyway, try not to commit the fallacy of equivocation. Clearly define any ambiguous words or phrases, and don't switch the meaning of a word halfway through the course of an argument. I've seen in the literature on abortion, sometimes people talk about the fallacy of equivocation. Like, you can make the argument that it's wrong to kill a person, and a fetus is a person, so therefore abortion is murder. But there's the argument as to whether or not the word human has got a moral and a genetic sense. So like, that's an argument that's made by Mary Ann Warren, who wrote a very famous article which defends the legal and moral permissibility of abortion. It's, you know, not everyone agrees with that position or conclusion, but her point was just that a lot of pro-life arguments rely on equivocating between the term fetus and person, as though anything with human DNA is morally on a par with a full-blown adult rational person. Anyways, though, just some different examples. Now I think we've covered equivocation in pretty good depth in the book. To avoid the fallacy of equivocation, clearly define any ambiguous words or phrases before proceeding with the argument or discussion. In addition, you need to avoid using relative terms in different contexts within the same argument. Okay, so much for equivocation, one of the 5 fallacies of ambiguity. You heard the definition, some examples, and that's good stuff to know. Sometimes it's important for you to know what the words of different legal statements mean, because sometimes you may consent to something like a user agreement or a contractual agreement, and later on you're held accountable for violation of the terms. And they may inform you violated the term when you acted in such and such a way, and you might think, well, I didn't know that that's what the term meant. But you have to be clear on the meaning of all relevant terms, especially when it involves your action or belief. Otherwise, equivocation can come back to harm you in these kind of contexts too. Okay, so next we've got amphibole. Okay, so the amphibole fallacy happens when there's a grammatical mistake in an argument which allows more than one conclusion to be drawn. Okay, so that's the definition. So this is the fallacy of grammatical error or grammatical ambiguity. So consider this just written statement. Or I don't want to write, I could just say it to you. Pretty easy to say. So if I tell you that Jack and Bill were hanging out and they were having a nice discussion about his girlfriend. What's ambiguous about that statement? When I say Jack and Bill were chilling talking about his girlfriend, which thing is grammatically ambiguous? The reference of which word or thing in that statement? Jack and Bill just chilling talking about his girlfriend, or talking about his dog, or talking about his whatever, his car? But can you identify for me the thing that makes that ambiguous and hard to parse? Whose girlfriend? That's right. And also, Diane, his. The word his. So the male pronoun his, him, whatever, he. If there are multiple male subjects referred to in the statement or argument, then we just don't have any ability to assign the reference to the pronoun. Okay, so Jack, Bill, both male subjects. The pronoun his or him could refer to either one. And so without further clarification, we're just left wondering what conclusion to draw. Were they having a discussion about Mr. Jack's girlfriend or Bill? And we just don't know. And just in general, that's the way that these amphibole fallacies go. Here's another possible example. So in the book, they refer to this episode in the early 2000s when a woman named Terry Schiavo was placed on life support, and the reason was because she had endured a very traumatic head injury in a car accident. Basically, that had put her into a vegetative coma, and all the doctors were telling her family and her husband at the time that there was no possible chance that she could ever revive consciousness, and that they were merely artificially supporting her continued survival through the use of these extraordinary life support machines. Now, she did not have a prior directive, meaning there was no advance statement given to anyone in terms of what to do in the event that she found herself in a permanent vegetative coma. So basically then, a decision had to be made as to whether or not to withdraw the life support or not. And there was a disagreement with regards to caretakers and family of Miss Schiavo. So her husband and the parents basically didn't agree as to whether or not she should be left on life support or removed. But read this sentence. It says, Terry Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides of the battle over her life. Now, the way that that statement is worded, it's grammatically ambiguous again. Because if it says Schiavo's mother and her husband are battling over her life, what makes that statement ambiguous? We do not know the reference of which word. Schiavo's mother and her husband are fighting over her life. So we don't know the reference of what word in that. Let me know. Schiavo's mother and her husband don't agree about whether to pull the plug. So tell me who are the people that are not agreeing, or what's ambiguous about the statement? You say the second her. Well, it's not even the second her, it's the first one. When it says Schiavo's mother and her husband, whose husband, basically? Whose husband? It could be that means Schiavo's mother and the husband of the mother, right? So like her parents don't agree. That's one interpretation. Schiavo's mother and her husband, her referring back to the mother as the female subject of the pronoun. But it could also be in reference to Schiavo's husband. See, when it says Schiavo's mother and her husband, the word her husband, it's not clearly set forward whether that is the husband of Schiavo's mother or the husband of Schiavo herself. Well, in fact, it was a disagreement between the husband of Schiavo and the mother of Schiavo. So the parents were on the same page, and the current husband of Miss Schiavo didn't agree. And that's what it says. In the statement regarding the issue of whether to remove the feeding tube from brain-damaged Schiavo, the ambiguous wording makes it unclear which conclusion follows. Is it Schiavo's husband or her father that is taking the opposite side? In this case, Schiavo's husband asked to have the feeding tube removed. The mother and father, believing that she still had a chance to regain consciousness, insisted that the feeding tube be kept in place. Yeah, that was a big, actually, like a kind of story for a little while. In fact, in the end, it turned out that former Governor Jeb Bush, who recently ran for president in 2016, is the brother of former President W. Bush. He sided with the parents. He wanted all extraordinary means to be continued to extend her life support. Eventually, though, yeah, they did pull the plug because it was futile. But anyway, just some context on that. Sometimes the amphibole fallacy can be seen for humorous effect, like in dialogue within film or novels or plays. There's a piece of dialogue from the comedy movie in 1996 called Spy Hard, and it's mentioned in the book. So it says this: Sir, we've intercepted a very disturbing satellite transmission from our listening post on the Rock of Gibraltar. The director responds, what is it? And he says, oh, well, yeah, it's this really big rock that sticks out of the water off the south coast of Spain. Now, that's humorous, I guess, because it's playing on the grammatical ambiguity of his question. When he asks, what is it? In response to the statement, we've intercepted a disturbing satellite transmission from our listening post on the Rock of Gibraltar. The question, what is it, just common sense tells you that that's in reference to the content of the transmission that was intercepted. What's the intercepted transmission? But since the statement said we intercepted it from our listening post on the Rock of Gibraltar, for humorous effect, the response given to the question is, what is it, meaning what's the Rock of Gibraltar? So without further disambiguation about the question and what it refers to, we have multiple different answers that are both viable. So one other example, sometimes advertisers will rely on grammatical ambiguity to sell a product. Clinique had a fragrance called Happy, and the tagline or slogan with it was "Wear it and be happy." Now, what's the function, though, of the word "and"? Is it a conjunction word, which is just saying that here are two separate, unrelated facts? Wear it, one thing, and separate from that, be happy. Or is "and" being used as a conditional word, like if you wear it, then you'll be happy. So it'll like cause the happiness. Of course, they're hoping that you draw the connection that it causes you to be happy, and that'll be what makes you want to buy it. But if you come back to Clinique later and you say, hey, I bought your fragrance, it says wear it and be happy, I wore it, and I probably fell into one of the deepest depressions, I wasn't happy, so is that false advertising? Well, then of course they can play on the ambiguity of the tagline itself and say, well, it's ambiguous, isn't it? Wear it and be happy. May not be a reference to a causal connection, but just a conjunction of two unrelated facts. Okay, one more, and then we'll move to the next of these 5. I'm trying to be slow and steady with it. What if someone said this? So I took a lot of photos of the indigenous natives. So let me think of how to word this. I took a lot of photos of the malnourished indigenous natives, but they are underdeveloped. So what's ambiguous there? I took photos of the malnourished indigenous natives, but they were not fully developed. They were underdeveloped. Which word has an ambiguous grammatical reference in this example? Took photos of those malnourished indigenous natives, but in the end they were underdeveloped. Not developed, no, but that's a good try. But they were not developed. The malnourished natives, they, right, Harry, because also not underdeveloped, Haley. It's the word they. It's a plural pronoun. So who does it refer? What does it refer to? One possibility is that when we say they were underdeveloped, we mean that the malnourished indigenous natives were underdeveloped, like skinny, not having enough food, not developed physically. But also, photography requires a process of developing film. So we could have thought that they refers to the pictures taken of these natives, and the pictures were not fully developed. Without further disambiguation, I guess that's something that could be within the realm of amphibole fallacy as well. Okay, so amphibole, just know that it's about grammatical ambiguity, and all these are different kind of reasonable examples of it. It's a funny word. It's a word that sounds like amphibian or something, but it's not about anything reptilian. It's just a kind of concept in grammar and logic. Okay, so that's amphibole fallacy, the second one. So we're moving to the next. Next is fallacy of accent. So the fallacy of accent happens when the meaning of an argument changes based on which word or phrase within it is emphasized. Okay, so fallacy of accent. So as you can see this is a fallacy that happens when the meaning of an argument or a statement changes, but why? Based on which word within the statement or argument is being emphasized. So one thing that's notable about language, either written or spoken, is that we can sometimes place an emphasis or an inflection on a certain word or phrase in a statement or an argument. And when we do that, we sort of accent the word. In writing or typing, we'll sometimes add italics to the word, or bold the word, or on the internet, sometimes all caps, right? To sort of call out that this is a word that you want to place extra emphasis on. The thing is, though, sometimes this added emphasis or accent or stress on the word can modify or alter the original intended meaning of a word or statement. Okay, so like, for example, here's from the book one case. So the mother comes home and she sees something terrible, that the little daughter has burned down the tool shed in the backyard. So burned it down. It's all sitting there, a pile of ashes, smoldering ashes. Mother comes over to the daughter and is like, come on, why'd you do that? I told you so many times. Didn't I say don't play with matches? And now look at what has happened. Suppose the daughter comes back with this line. Mom, I know that you said don't play with matches, but I wasn't playing at all. I mean, this is for me like a science experiment. I was, setting things on fire, very, very serious about it. This isn't no game to me, so I didn't play with matches. Now, obviously, what word is being accented by the daughter, which is changing the intended message of the parent? You can tell me that. If you followed the example and you heard the way I said it, then maybe you'll be able to tell me what word or phrase is this child placing emphasis on so as to misrepresent the meaning of the first statement. Yeah, that's the word play. So when the mother said don't play with matches, what do you think that really just means, basically? Like, overall, what does the statement don't play with matches mean to you, to anybody reasonable? Like, what did the parent mean when they said it in the first place, if we were like being real about it? Don't play with matches means what? Don't use them, don't touch them, don't light matches, just don't strike a match, okay? But when the daughter places this accent on it, like, I know that, but that's the thing. I wasn't playing with them. I was doing science, So the child, by placing accent on the word, changes the meaning of, like, just don't use them to something else. Like, you can use them as long as you're not having fun, or you can use them as long as it's not like a silly game or whatever. That's obviously misconstruing the original message, and that would be a fallacy of accent right there. So let's see. Another case. Parent tells the kid, I don't like this one friend that you've been hanging out with. I think they're just bad news, bad influence on you. So I'm going to tell you straight up, and I want you to listen and be very clear that from this day forward, I don't ever want to see that person walking through this front door of my house again. Okay? So that's what I'm telling you, that your parent says that to you. So then, like a week later, mom, dad, whoever said that, sees you chilling in your room with the person. And they're like, they call you to the side. They're like, what are you doing? I said you're never supposed to let this person in. Why are they here? Why are you disobeying me? And you say to the parent, what do you think? How's this one going to end? Anybody have a guess? Because, I'm going to just do it anyway. But if this is going to be a fallacy of accent example, what do you think will be the response back from the child or whatever, young person in reaction to the parent saying, what are you doing? I said, don't ever let this person come through the front door. Now they're in your house. Oh, sorry, they're in your room. There you go, Dimitri, right. They could be like, I know you said that. You said, don't ever let them come through the door again. So, I let them in through the window. And, they climb up through the window, so that's totally fair, right, according to your rules. But obviously, this is, again, a accent fallacy because we're misinterpreting the message of the parent by adding that inflection or stress. Clearly, they didn't mean they can be in the house. I just don't like it when they walk through the door specifically. That's just shorthand. Don't let them walk through this door again for, like, you know what it means. Don't ever let them in this house again, or don't hang out with them. So yet another example from the book. According to the school newspaper, the administration wants to crack down on off-campus drinking. I'm really glad that they're okay with on-campus drinking. So, like, placing that accent on the word off. I've heard they're going to crack down on off-campus drinking, as though the message delivered by the school administrators is drinking is fine as long as it's on campus. Once it's off campus, that's when we have a problem with it. That's clearly not what's mentioned or meant. They're just saying that in addition to our on-campus rules and regulations forbidding drinking, we also want to kind of enforce some of those rules at dorms and stuff like that, school events. So yeah, these are different examples. Notice that when we place an emphasis or a stress on a word, it can really change the whole characteristic of the larger statement that it's a part of. Like, if I just say in a flat monotone, why did you steal my bike? It has content, it has information, and you can understand that. But if I start just bouncing around and emphasizing, accenting different words in the same sentence, it brings out different kind of context. So what if I say it this way? Why did you steal my bike? Now by placing accent on the word you, it sort of means this. Of all people, I can't believe that you would have done it. I mean, I would have thought some of my other friends or people I know would have done it, but you, really? Why would you steal my bike? What if I say, why did you steal my bike? Now the accent is placed on the word bike, so it's like, of all things you could have taken from me, you know how much I love that bike. Why would you have stolen my bike? Really, the bike? Why did you steal my bike? Now I'm placing accent on me, like I know you're a thief and I know you steal, but really me, I thought I was the one person that you would not do that to, or et cetera, et cetera. So by accenting the same, different words in the same sentence, we bring out different kind of characteristic qualities or meanings in the sentence. Sometimes that can be for rhetorical effect and it's fine, but in other cases it amounts to a fallacy because we're misinterpreting almost sometimes intentionally given messages that we've heard from others. So one last example from the book, which I thought was interesting. Remember in the beginning of this chapter, they talked about like cult movements that sometimes recruit, impressionable young people and they never get heard from again. Well, sometimes they'll use this method called proof texting to induce further belief in the cult's message. What that is trying to use the person's already established religious beliefs as a sort of bridge to commitment to the cult too. So like the Brethren, for example, if you tell them, I don't believe that this cult is good or right, I'm just a normal Christian and that sounds weird to me. And they might say, well, come on though, in the Bible, if you read it, it says, so likewise, whosoever of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. Luke 14:33. So they're quoting scripture, but they're placing this emphasis on one part of the scripture, which says, if you don't forsake all that you have, you cannot be my disciple. And then they follow that by, well, what that means basically is you're supposed to cut off ties with everyone except for the members of this cult that are in the Brethren. Because you got to forsake it all that you have. Now that tries to give the person the inclination to follow their message further because they think that it has to do with their existing religious views. Or you could say, in the Bible, it says right there, be your brother's keeper. What do you think it means, brother's keeper? I mean, we're the Brethren. So it's basically telling you to join this group and be a part of it. So anyway, sometimes when people quote things out of context and they place accent or stress on certain words, you might go back to the original source to determine for yourself whether or not that's the right understanding, or whether through the utilization of emphasis, accenting, or stress, the original message has been somewhat distorted or misconstrued. Okay, so that's accent fallacy and some different examples of it. And there are two more of these fallacies of ambiguity. Like I said, I think earlier, they're similar in a way, at least the structure of them is similar, but they're kind of two for one. So we have the division fallacy. And the division fallacy happens when you make an erroneous inference from the characteristics of a whole group to an inference about a single member of a group. So here's the way I will define that. A characteristic of an entire group is erroneously, so that just means in error, erroneously, is erroneously assumed to be a characteristic of each member of that group. Okay, so division fallacy. A characteristic of an entire group is incorrectly assumed to be a quality, a characteristic of each member of that group. Now here's the form that the division fallacy takes, okay? Just in terms of the structure it has in an argument. Two premises, conclusion. First premise is going to say this, that there's this group that has a certain characteristic. So let's just write it as follows. Group G, and I'm just making that general, G stands for whatever group there could be, so this is just a form. Group G has characteristic C. Okay, so that's first premise. Group G has characteristic C. Second premise, some individual X is a member of this group. X is a member of G. So the conclusion that you would think would follow would be that since group G has this quality, and one individual is a member of that group, therefore the individual has that same quality, but that's not always the case. So the conclusion shall be X has the same characteristic C that the whole group does. Okay, so what you need to know about this as a fallacy is that sometimes a feature that is seen in a whole group is not seen in every individual member of the group. So for example, men are taller than women, just overall, like average height, okay? So suppose that now we say that group G, men, has the quality taller than women. Now, suppose that we give the name of some man. Danny DeVito, for example. Do you guys know who Danny DeVito is? He's like 5 foot or 4'11" actor. He's been on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia for a long time. He's had a long Hollywood film career. Anyway, the point is he's short, but he's a man. So say that we start with men are taller than women. Danny DeVito is a man. So therefore, Danny DeVito is taller than the average woman. That does not follow, okay? Because yes, he's a member of a group that as a general matter is taller than the average woman, but not every single individual member of the group has the quality taller than the average woman. Here's another example. The United States is the most wealthy nation in the world. That is true. We have the most wealth in the world as a country. So United States has this characteristic, wealthiest nation in the world. Now, you're a member of that group, let's suppose, if you're a citizen of the United States. So just fill in X for your name. So does it follow that you are the most wealthy person in the world? No. I mean, you're a part of a big group, the United States, which as a whole has massive and fantastic wealth beyond what other countries have. But just because the country is the wealthiest country doesn't mean that each individual citizen, which is a member of it, is extremely wealthy. Men make more money than women. That's a sad thing, I think, when you compare the fact that there's equivalent work and still women on average in our country and in many others make slightly less money than men do. So take that as your first premise. Men earn more than women. So my dad is a man. Therefore, my dad makes more money than my mom. Is that necessarily true? No. I mean, even if that's the general pattern, it's not seen in every individual case or every individual comparison of man versus an individual woman. So another case of the division fallacy. The football team, let's see. So the Lakers are, I don't know if this is clear enough because there's been trouble with the Lakers. So I guess I got to think of a better example. But suppose you have a team that's just dominant in their sport, like the best and most dominant team that's winning everything. So the group as a whole is the best team in the game. Then pick one like bench riding, not great member of the group. Does it follow that that individual is one of the best players in the league? No. You could be part of a team that's the best, but that doesn't mean every individual member of the team is the best. Okay, so all of these are different examples. Sometimes stereotype type of reasoning can be seen with division fallacy. I don't want to repeat any negative stereotypes because those are bad, but sometimes there are positive stereotypes, which the book mentions one. Canadian people have a reputation for being very nice and friendly overall. So suppose that we say Canadians are friendly, and Joe is a Canadian, therefore Joe is friendly. Not necessarily the case, though. Even if you have a culture which as a whole has this kind of reputation or stereotype, it doesn't necessarily imply that every single member of the same group has that same given quality. Okay, so you need to look at people on a case-by-case basis, and not just people, but structures. Suppose that there's a large hotel. The hotel is large. Room 101 is one of the rooms. Does that mean that room 101 is large? No. You can have a large hotel with a lot of small parts or small rooms. So anyway, we cannot always so quickly assume that because a whole has a feature, that each part of a whole has a feature too. Sometimes the whole is greater than the sum of its parts and has features that each individual element doesn't have. And we see this as a fallacy of division. So I told you that we have one more on this topic. We'll begin that on Wednesday. The last fallacy of ambiguity is kind of the flip side to division, which is composition. And then after we finish that, we'll be on to the second batch, which are the fallacies of relevance. So that's the plan for Wednesday, everyone. I guess we're done with today's scheduled meeting. So anyway then, I'll let you guys go, but make sure to let me know here in the chat that everyone's fine and good and that you have no other further questions. Then I'll be able to close our stream. So how are we doing? Are we good? Just let me know. Just takes a few seconds for the whole time lag to process. Okay, perfect, guys. So thanks again so much. I'll see you back on Wednesday. If you do need anything at any time, feel free, and I'll be in touch through email. Okay, then. Bye-bye, guys. See you soon. Oh, let me just say this. Did I mention this, that I got the corona vaccine this weekend? I might not have said it. Maybe I'm repeating it. It's kind of exciting news in a way because I can finally think about the future a little bit more. But soon you guys will probably all be on the same page with that too as we get closer to May. I'm only on the first dose. I have to take the second one April 3rd, but it was pretty chill. Okay, guys. Well, thanks again. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.